Hey staff, welcome to video 2 of our systems module. And we're so excited. We discussed how pumped we get about systems, but the importance of having systems in our life. Now, we want to recap a little bit. So in video 1, we talked about the preparing, equipping, and inspiring, and how important each one of those pieces are in leadership development. Well, the preparing piece is really onboarding a volunteer. And as we discussed in those questions previously that Zach and I went over when we thought about that volunteer that maybe wasn't so stellar, that was underperforming, we thought of when we talked at those questions, really all of those questions reflected to a poor onboarding system. And onboarding systems are important because they lay the foundation for someone. So we want to talk right now about the benefits of that solid system, but then also the pitfalls that we can get into. So what's the best way to do this? Because we all do it. We all have to onboard somehow. So what does that look like? What's our best system with onboarding?
Let me just share you a fun story, Kim. So, I think it was a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I volunteered to be a coach for my daughter's soccer team. I said, sure, I'll coach her. And it was the worst process I've ever gone through. Like I said, I volunteer. Nobody told, I got told the night before, hey, there's a training tomorrow. Can you come? I'm like, no, I'm working already. Like I can't adjust my schedule 24 hours in advance always. They said, hey, we'll get you your team's roster by this date. It came like 2 weeks later. And so I never got, I'm like, are there rules? Like, I don't know, like, what are the rules for how, for this soccer league? I don't know. I never knew the rules, what they wanted me to coach or how they wanted me to coach. They said do practice once a week. I didn't know if that was like a half-hour practice, an hour practice. Like I was emailing the director like every day with 5 new questions because I just didn't know. And, we made it work.
Yeah.
And my daughter had a good time. The team, we had a great time. They asked me at the end of the year though, like, well, can you do this again? And I was like, I'm not doing that again. It just wasn't like I had all these questions that I didn't know the answer to. I didn't know lots of things. And it created my onboarding process to become a soccer coach, made me go, I don't want to do this again. At least with that league, maybe a different league another time, but that was a horrible experience and I hated it.
Well, and little do they know, I mean, you're great at connecting with the hearts of kids and you're actually well suited to do something like that. So had they onboarded you a little bit differently, you could have been back there and you might have volunteered the next year. But it makes me think about that. Now, granted, I know we're talking about 8-year-old girls soccer here, but that's a competitive world in some parts of our country, But what if one of those leaders had been onboarded differently than Zach, and that made a big difference in their performance of that team? And so that brings up one of the big pitfalls of onboarding is a lack of consistency. We have to be consistent with onboarding, but there are so many things that keeps us from being consistent. So, but first of all, like, what's the main harm of not being consistent in onboarding?
The main harm is every person who comes on our church and volunteers, and we have hundreds of people who volunteer, who give their time and give their energy. They all experience something different right now. They don't know, they get different experiences. They get different training. We use different vocabulary. We set different expectations. Like it's not consistent at all. And so we all think we struggle sometimes of recognizing those things.
Well, I would even say if you look within one ministry, so let's say you look within children's ministry, and let's look at a volunteer who is onboarded well and a volunteer who's not onboarded well. First of all, the difference between those two could just be one needed to onboard the week between trunk or treat, and one onboarded in August when I was a little slower, And so the lack of consistency due to my lack of time, and there's a lack of system there is what created it, first of all, okay? But second of all, maybe this volunteer, I think this is the one that I said August, this volunteer was onboarded really well and feels very confident in their role and is walking in that confidence. This volunteer over here that didn't get onboarded very well because of my lack of consistency, because I didn't have a good system to follow, they are always insecure and always feels like they're not doing a good job and questioning their ability to serve in the position that I put them in, especially when they compare themselves to someone else. But little do they know, they started at the same time, but it was my lack of following through to make sure that they were onboarded well at the same time. I'm
That's good.
talking like I have hand puppets, and I'm sorry.
The children's
But
ministry.
it works.
It
But
works.
yeah, that's the difference that it makes. So we have to be consistent to give every leader the opportunity to be successful in their role. But not only within your ministry, Zach and I are presenting to you today the benefit of us being as consistent across the board at New Life.
Yeah, it's the picture, the idea of doing a church-wide consistent onboarding process was really significant. I was talking to somebody earlier who works in the corporate world, and they said that the significant difference when they move from just a department organized onboarding process to now a corporate wide, like it literally has shifted the culture of their organization for the better, because there's more buy-in, there's more care, there's more heart, and they're not losing people. And so, Kim, let's walk through this a little bit. Like, what would it look like for us to shift, or the difference between a church-wide onboarding process compared maybe just to our ministry-only onboarding process? Like, what might be 5 benefits of just keep it the way it is? Like, let's do ministry-specific onboarding. Like, why should we stay there?
So some of you may say, hey, if I just improve consistency, I would prefer that you leave me alone and let me onboard my own volunteers in my ministry, because my ministry is going to need to onboard differently than your ministry. So we recognize that there may be some true benefits to there. You could say, one, that they're trained your way because they're going to be under your leadership. Number 2, you could say, hey, it's a whole lot faster if you just let me train my own people. Number 3, you could say it's more flexible and more personalized if you're letting me train for my ministry. Number 4, you could say it gets them into the game faster. I can get them out to shoot and serving on Sunday morning if you'll just leave me alone and let me do my thing. And then number 5, you could say, there's no accountability. So when it gets a little crazy, even if I drop the ball, nobody's going to be breathing down my neck about it. Okay.
And when Cindy sends an email out saying, hey, there's a person who's interested in you. No, we don't know. It works.
Yeah, so nobody's really watching me, and that really happens. And I'm guilty of that myself, okay? Like the week before trunk or treat, like I really stink at this. But we hear all of that. Zach and I wrote this list because we recognize that, we see that. But now, Zach, tell us about what's the harms of ministry-specific onboarding.
Yeah, so we're really only, the first harm would be that we're only developing leaders based upon our ministry, not based upon their development as a person. So again, it goes back to that ministry-specific versus people-specific programming, and so development. So we really want to focus on developing people for whatever God has for them, or it's for us now and for them later, but we really want to develop people for the long term and for whatever their influence, both in the church and outside the church and all those things. Second, we typically, and I'm really good at this, really guilty of this, typically train and do our onboarding based upon our strengths, not what is needed in that role. I mean, Kim, you and I are drastically different people. We are. And you and I have talked about this, and in our time working together, like how you onboard people and compared to how I onboard people. And you and I both do it drastically based upon our personalities and what we like and our preferences, and which is fine. But I fully know, like, I miss out. Like, my personality is not well-rounded. Your person, like, there's things I miss because I'm not, because of my own preferences. And so we typically train and onboard people based upon our own preferences and our own strengths and our own style. And so we miss out on giving a holistic approach to really developing leaders. Third, we don't share information across ministries. The reality is, like, I have my system, you have your system, and so there's not cross pollinating of information of what's going on in that person's life. And we're all guilty of this. And but the opportunity, we just don't share what's going on in those people's lives. We don't have a central place of gathering information.
Right.
You said this in the one that this is a benefit, but the harm is there's no accountability. Cindy, I just confess, I probably dropped too many emails of people you sent to me at times, or those connection cards we've got. Like, I don't want that to happen. My heart in this and in our conversations, why we're doing this, is we want to not missing people and holding,
But how sad if you filled out one of those cards and no one called you. And so, yeah, I mean, and that's happened to me too. So we need accountability there.
Or if I, maybe even on a good day, if I get one, I might wait a month and then go back to my emails and go, oh, I need to email that person. Like that's not good. Right. So, and then that's the last term I would just talk about is we're not connected to the church mission and vision. And like we're doing it based upon our own needs and our own ministry, which I know is part of the church, but there's a difference when we're saying this is who we are. We want to help lead and develop people at a church perspective. And so that's the harm of us doing it, keeping it in our own in-house ministry. So, but why should we move to an onboarding process that's all church-wide?
Okay, so we're talking about, just to be clear, so we're all on the same board, we're saying that we all have to onboard in some regard in our own specific ministry. And we all agree that we need to be consistent, but not just being consistent in your little world. We're saying that we need to be consistent church-wide. We want church-wide all ministries to be in line with how we onboard. So children's ministry, student ministry, adult ministry, worship ministry, everybody, we want us to all be on the same, when we say church-wide, we want us all to operate under the same system and how we onboard our team members, our coaches, our leaders, all of this. So the benefit of why we want on board church-wide. Number one, it's consistency in equipping. We want consistency in equipping because let's say maybe if someone grows and matures in their abilities, maybe as their season of life changes, they recognize that maybe this place of service isn't the best for them and they feel God is leading them over here to this place of service. We want them to transition really well. I don't want to have a volunteer that served for me for 3 years and then come to you and Zach serve in your ministry and you say, they don't know anything about this or that or whatever, and you realize that I've really handed you someone that you're like, this person is not really in a leadership capacity, you know? So we want to make sure that we are all together in this, so we are consistently equipping so that people, you know, that zigzag that Zach showed us can consistently move up and serve and walk in the gifting that God has given them. So what would you say, Zach? What's number 2?
Yeah, consistency in care. So it goes back to that span of care conversation last month. Like if we are consistent and having a church-wide span of care is happening and we're not missing people. Nobody, you know, Cindy's not following up with us and saying, have you emailed that person yet? Have you reached out to that person yet? Or every person who comes through an onboarding process, we can care for every person and we can know that. And so that we don't lose people along the way and stuff. So consistency in care, that would be number 2. But then number 3 is the less chance of someone falling through the cracks. Like both of those are so important. We want to care for every person who's serving in our ministry and someone who is inquiring about getting involved. We don't lose them. And so those would be number 2 and 3. So wrap us up, Kim. What's number 4 and 5?
Number 4 would be drawing on the ministry strengths of a staff rather than the specific ministry leader. So I would say Zach and I are very different, but in my regards, like I'm great at that relational piece, but I really think at some of the details that I need to really prepare someone for leading in my role. But if we're all following a system, it helps us make sure that we're not missing anything. There's lots of input and lots of things that went into developing that system and lots of stopgaps to where they're not just onboarded and prepared by Kim, but others who have put into it have helped me create a whole picture that's going to help prepare them well in this preparation stage of onboarding. And I would say number 5 is it will put the potential volunteer ahead of ministry needs. So that means that because we have a system in place, I am going to interview the person and hear their heart and hear about their giftings and identify those things. And I'm going to look at the role that I'm asking them to serve in. If they don't fit that role, because we have taken the time and walked through the system to do this, then I have the ability to help send them to the ministry where they would better fit. And we've been onboarded the same, but I can say, you know what? I know that Ryan is actually looking for someone like this in his ministry. And when I look at your giftings, you better fit the roles that he has available there. How loved does that make you feel that I recognize the gifting that you have in you and I want you to soar? I don't just want you to fill a hot spot in my ministry so I'm not crying on Sunday mornings. I want you to be where God wants you to be and where God is appointing you for service right now. And so when we're consistently working together on this, it benefits the entire church and it helps us operate together as a body.
That's a lot right there we just talked about. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit pause on this video. And there's going to be another video right below this that you might, so I'm going to give you a chance to stand up, stretch, and then we're actually going to sit down and walk through here, propose a step-by-step process of what a church-wide alignment onboarding process will look like in this assignment. And so I'll hit pause and hit stop and then stand up, stretch, and then come back here in a minute and watch video 2 in this conversation.